So hello there again. So some of you guys showed interest in using hand planes and learning how to tune them. Now a lot of you may have one or two at home and probably found quite frustrating using them because they don't cut well. So they get thrown to the side and never used again, and that's a shame because these things are relatively simple to use and maintain, and they'll leave a surface right off the first pass that no other tool will leave. That means glass smooth and perfectly finished, so you don't have to use sandpaper or anything else like that. So I'm going to explain to you how to tune these things and using several different types that you may find or you may have. So they essentially all do the same thing. Some are more specialized for certain things than others. But the common ones that you'll find are these, which is a regular Stanley plane. And again, this is what you find pretty much all the time. You may come across something like this, which is also a Stanley plane, and it's called a transitional plane because it was at the time when they started switching from wood planes to metal planes using the metal plane mechanism. So this was incorporated the two worlds, the wood and the adjustability of the metal plane. These are great planes. You usually find them pretty cheap in flea markets and stuff like that. They are absolutely great. So when you take a plane, there's several components to it. You have the lever cap, you have the iron, the cut up, and some call this the second iron, or it's essentially what it is. It's a chip breaker. So we'll go into that later. And you have the frog of the plane, which is this part, and then of course the body of the plane. Now, of course they got to be sharp, but most people are able to reasonably well sharpen a plane blade without too much of a hassle. That's not always the problem. The problem is in the mechanics of it. Now, starting with the blade, what you have here is the second iron, which is in the back of the first one. And the function of this is as the plane cuts, basically it's a wedge going into the wood. And its function is to create for that shaving to curl right up rather than to go on a straight line, therefore reducing the wedge effect and leaving a much more finished surface than if you did not have that. So it's essential that this part, which is probably one of the most important parts on the plane, if it has one, that it fit precisely over the back of the plane without any gaps. So when you put a flashlight to it and you look through there, you should not see any light, because what happens is that if there is a gap there, a lot of times the shaving will go into that gap and get stuck there, and what happens is that then the plane starts clogging. The other shavings have no place to go and start clogging around that one or going into the sides of that one, and it just creates a mess and it won't cut. And that's a pretty frustrating thing for it to happen. Now, this, for most uses, this should be set back about a 16th from the edge of the plane, the edge of the iron. The closer it is to the edge, the finer shaving you will take and the better surface you will leave. So most of mine are within a 16th or closer, depending on what I use them. When I use this one is more for a general use, so I don't need to worry about leaving a very finished surface. So I have it back quite a bit. Now, when we're talking about the actual iron itself, you will notice that this one is slightly curved. Most of mine are slightly curved unless it's a plane that I use to make a joint, like joining an edge where you're going to glue two boards together. The reason for that is because when you use this plane, if you had a perfectly flat iron across, you would dig in on the edges and leave ridges on the surface that you are planing. This way, essentially, it only cuts in the middle somewhere, and it's like using a carving gouge. It leaves a finished surface where it comes out, so you'll never see that ridge. This one is substantially curved. This one is not as curved. Again, it's for general purpose use. It's a very slight curve, and that's basically the way you want to have them for most purposes. Real flat iron all the way across, perfectly straight, is really not recommended. Again, only if you use that plane for joinery. Now, as to the angle that you sharpen these things, it's usually about 25 degrees, more or less. It's not a very, very critical thing. Within plus or minus 5 degrees, it's fine. Some of them, you have here a brand new one, never used, a modern one. It actually even says 25 degrees grinding angle on there. But again, that's not the most terribly important part to worry about. Now, going back to the plane, this is called the frog. And this part of the plane is adjustable. You have to loosen those screws there. And some of them have another screw in the back, the better ones, that you turn, and it moves that frog back and forth. Okay, like that. And then, of course, you tighten that again. If it does not have that, like on the case of this one, you just have to move it by hand and just keep it parallel to the opening on the plane. Now, this is another important part, because what happens is, for general use, again, same principle as that part. For general use, it's okay to have a wide mouth on the plane, like that. That one is not too wide. This one, see how open it is, and the blade is almost to the point where it starts cutting. That'll leave a rough surface, because again, as the shaving is cut and it goes into the throat of the plane, it's not supported, so it has a tendency to split. For the first thousandths of an inch is split, so it leaves a rough surface. So this plane is only good for general purpose, and even that's a pretty excessive gap. That is more like what you want. And again, that is adjustable on these planes, and you're going to move that frog forward, back and forth to where you want it, by using the adjustment. And then, of course, you're going to tighten it. And there you go. So, the other important thing with these planes is that as he cuts, this iron has to be firmly bedded on the bed. Okay, you cannot be rattling around, especially at the very top, the very tip of the cutter there, where all the pressure is applied. You cannot vibrate or chatter, because then it leaves a rough cut again, and it doesn't cut well, and you may even skip and jump. So that's a pretty frustrating thing to deal with. So it has to be absolutely flat and firmly attached to that bed. And what does that is the lever cap, which you put in there, and it's got this cam. You adjust it so it tightens securely, but without being too hard to do. You can even do a little bit more on this one. And that's good enough, because it puts a ton of pressure down there. Plus, these planes are all metal, so they're really firm. So if you tighten it too much, what happens is that it's very hard to adjust here. The depth of the plane is very hard to adjust. And if it's too loose, what happens is as you cut and it vibrates, it puts pressure on the blade and it vibrates, it knocks it loose, knocks the blade back. This may even come out and pop out, and so you need to have that like sort of firm enough so that won't happen, but you can still turn that without a problem. The other thing that has a big influence on how these things cut is the thickness of the iron. In these new planes, you have no choice. You got a thin iron. That's pretty much what you find on most of them. This is a brand new one. This is a brand new one too, but it's over 100 years old. But you can see it's used on a wood plane, but you can see how much thicker they are, and they taper. That's for another different reason. This tapered iron could not be used on this plane. It would have to be a straight iron, not tapered. But these are very flimsy, so if anything is off in the adjustment, they vibrate and they just don't cut well. So recapping this a little bit, so you have the iron, which is important, with the chip breaker on it. That is a very important part for it to meet the back of the iron precisely. So a lot of times you have to grind them a little bit so they're flat and meet the back of the iron. A little trick on this sometimes is, because again you should sharpen them to a point, so it makes contact easily. A trick on this a lot of times is to, after you set it back a little bit like this one, and you tighten it, and then with a screwdriver just force it up against the edge of it, back and forth. And what happens is that if it's ground properly to meet the cutter, you are able to push the metal back slightly and eliminate any gap that it may have. So then the shaving just hits it and curls and comes out of the throat of the plane. So the other thing, so it's that, how the bed is adjusted, and the frog, how the frog is adjusted, and the whole thing is the frog, and the flat part, of course, the face of it is the bed. How that's adjusted, how the lever cap is installed and secured. And another thing which most of you don't have to worry about, if it's a metal plane, the bottom of it is supposed to be perfectly flat. It's supposed to be straight, flat, and without any twist. If you want to do that, it's a lot of work. But on a metal plane, the best thing to do is to get a long sheet of sandpaper, tape it on something like a table saw, set the iron back so you're not sanding the iron. Make sure the cutter is on it and that lever cap is tightened the same way that you would use it, because believe it or not, if you had it loose and you were to examine the bottom of it with something that could measure something that small, you would measure one thing. Once you tighten it, believe it or not, it does affect the bottom of the plane. So when you flatten the bottom of the plane, you want to make sure that everything is as if you were going to use the plane. And once you have that sheet of paper on the table saw, you basically, with a lubricant, you're just going to use it back and forth on the sandpaper, and you'll see right away where the low and the high spots are. And you're just going to be taking the high spots until the whole bottom is absolutely flat, and it should be like a mirror finish. Now, for a plane, for most of you don't have to worry about that because they're fairly straight. But if it's something that you want a flawless surface and a perfectly cutting plane, that needs to be done, and that would look like the bottom of this one, perfectly flat, shiny like a mirror, and again, there's no twist. It's absolutely straight this way, straight across of it, and it's a perfect surface. So that's pretty much how do you tune that plane and what's important on it for it to cut well. Another thing that going back to the size of the mouth is if you have a wood plane, you'll find these all over the place. These are great to use. And again, some of the mouths may be too large for general purpose. It's okay, just rough up a stuff and clean up a board or an edge. It's fine. But if you want a nice smooth surface, finished surface on whatever you're planing, that needs to be a lot closer than that. And what you do there, you can just route a little recess and add a piece very close to the edge, and again that will support the shaving, and that this plane will leave a much better surface than this one. The ultimate of that is this one where it's adjustable. This is one that I made, and that part there is adjustable back and forth. Basically looks like nothing fits through there, but believe me, your shaving fits through there, and that will leave you a perfect surface. Again, for most uses, you don't have to be that close, but that's an important thing. So these are the planes that you will find. The very common Stanley or Sargent or 1,000 other brands of plane. You will find these guys, which are really great planes because what they do is you have the advantages of a wood plane, which is low friction and lightweight, and the advantages of the metal plane, which is the ease of adjustability. So these guys are really great, and then they come around pretty inexpensively. Then you'll find the regular metal wood planes like these. These guys are a little different to adjust and a little different to tune. Again, what's important with these things, again, it's the same things, although you use different methods to do that, is for that iron to be bedded perfectly flat and securely against the bed. And these, of course, use a wedge, which has to be fitted perfectly to the abutment. These are called the abutments on the sides of the plane. If you change the iron, inevitably that wedge will no longer fit precisely the same, or it won't fit well at all. So you got to rework the wedge or make another one. So these guys are also very handy to use, very easy to use, and the principle of the iron is the same. These are the ones I use, a tapered iron, and the reason for that is because of the wedge. So most wood planes use an iron like that. Not all of them. This is one I made and uses a straight iron. These irons were made for me, and they're a full 3/16 thick, which is very important because you don't want them to. The thicker iron will not shatter, and then if it's perfectly bedded and secured onto the plane, then it's a real pleasure to use something like that. But usually they're not that thick. The thickest ones you find are probably like a good 1/8 of an inch. So, and again, because this plane, I am able to have a very fine mouth to the point that there's almost no light shining through, and it's perfectly secure. This iron is so thick and it's perfectly secured in there. I really don't need a chip breaker on this one. I don't need that chip breaker, and I don't use one. It actually allows the plane to eject the shavings a lot easier. And again, because of all these other things that most of them don't have, I don't need to use a chip breaker on this one. So these are the planes you find. As far as manufactured planes, these of course are handmade by an individual, though a lot of them are commercially made, but these are not. As far as commercially made planes, again, that's what you're going to find most of the times, or that one. If you come across something like this and it's cheap, buy it, because this is a $700 plane every day of the week and twice on Sunday. It's a Norris. from before the war. It's an English plane, and it's considered a Rolls Royce of any manufactured plane. It's got a unique adjustment, sideways and of course up and down. It weighs about almost 3 pounds. It's a real heavy plane, and it cuts really nice when it's perfectly tuned. Again, it's got to be perfectly tuned, otherwise it's just as useless as any other plane. The advantage again of a very heavy plane like this over this plane, they cut both equally well. However, if you're cutting a board, if you're playing a face of a board that's very hard wood or very twisted and crazy grain, this plane is light, so it doesn't have the mass to gain the inertia that you need in planing a board like that. That's where this guy comes in, because this is so heavy that, I mean, you want, and if he finds a knot or anything like that, it really makes no difference. He just goes right through it. This one will meet that resistance, and it may shatter or come up or jump a little bit. To avoid a lot of that, and that's the next topic here, if you look at all these planes, when you put them all together, you see that the irons are all bedded at the same angle, which is about 40, it's not about, it is 45 degrees. Not all planes are like that. All manufactured planes are like that. Custom-made planes are not like that. This one, if you look at it, compared to that one, is better, much steeper angle than that one. This is at about 50 degrees, and the reason for that is when you use them in hardwoods or woods with a crazy grain, you don't want a plane that will sort of dig in too much. You want a plane that will scrape more than it cuts, and that's why you bed this iron at 50 degrees or more. Some of them are even steeper than that. I have some that are actually a scraping plane actually goes in the opposite direction, and that's why you use these planes like that, because they take a more scraping sound rather than a cutting, shaving, scraping cut than these guys that are more of a slicing action. And these are particularly suited to softwoods like pine or something like that, or poplar, where you need a blade with a sharper angle and set at a lower angle. And that's that. Easy enough. You just got to remember about all of these parts, what they do and how they should be adjusted, and that's it. We'll deal with sharpen these irons in a different video, because again, most people can do that properly, and it's essential, but it's not what causes these guys not to perform well a lot of the times. Thanks for watching.